So I was just explaining that to Catherine that the pharmaceutical sector's engagement with mental health CSOs or civil society writ large is always quite a controversial issue, and it sort of has a lot of mixed views, and that's reflected within the membership of the Action Network. Well, yeah, if you want to come forward, you can. I mean, I don't necessarily need his microphone. It's only because they're recording it. And so it's a really difficult conversation, and we are often, I would say, it's a topic of conversation that comes up. Should we be allowing the private sector as a whole to be a member of the Action Network? What about the pharmaceutical sector in particular? At the moment, the policy of the Action Network is that there is no boundaries on who is allowed to join the network, as long as you adhere to our code of conduct, which is really about your personal individual behavior within the network, like any other sort of organization. So it is truly multi-sectoral at the moment. We have, though, before, when we have run events, I remember we ran an event with, discussing the pharmaceutical sector with the Access to Medicines Index, or the Access to Medicines Foundation, and Johnson & Johnson in 2019 at one of the annual meetings. We had a session on that, and afterwards we did receive some criticism for providing a platform for the pharmaceutical sector at an Action Network annual meeting. And periodically since then, we've had comments or discussions or feedback about that. So, as the Action Network Secretariat, we thought, well, what we need to do is to really look into this without just making maybe a knee-jerk reaction in terms of policy about membership for the organization. And we need to figure out that ourselves. So we started to look into it. And then, and I'll go into this in a minute, about this was off the back of an Open Society Foundation project that was looking at the same issue, but in a wider context in terms of civil society engagement with the pharmaceutical sector in sub-Saharan Africa. And we felt that if this is a problem that we're sort of grappling with at the moment, then it might be something that other members of the network might be grappling with as well. So if we can produce something that has good consultation, that we feel is well researched, then it might be a solution that others might want to adopt, or they might want to tailor themselves. So that's sort of the background of what this is. So I mentioned the Open Societies Foundation project. So in 2020, OSF started a research project which was looking at the relationship between civil society in sub-Saharan Africa and pharmaceutical companies, and they held quite a thorough research process, talking to a number of stakeholders. Some are here actually, and others are members of the network, and then people outside of that as well. It wasn't an Action Network project at all. We were on the steering group for that, and a report was finalized, and it was distributed, but it wasn't published. So what happened was that OSF had a change in their structure and their funding, and mental health wasn't such a huge priority for the foundation anymore. And the project, which was then going to go on from the research report to go into, okay, what would be a type of solution, paused indefinitely and hasn't restarted. So we have this really great resource, which is this report, and I've got a sign-up sheet here, so if people would like to read that, if you just note your name down, or I can note your name down, I can make sure you get a copy of it. And what did that find? Well, it found that CSOs struggle to fund themselves. That's not big news for this conference. But it's very difficult to come by funding. CSOs, particularly at grassroots, are really struggling. It was almost unanimous, I think, in terms of respondents from those involved in the sub-Saharan African consultation, that funding is one of their major priorities and one of the biggest struggles. The research also found that there's a huge resource gap between what's needed and what's there. So just building on that funding point, that that funding gap means that CSOs are often turning to the private sector, and that includes pharma for their funding. So there's a lot of the organizations that were involved in the research for that report were saying that they would receive funding from the private sector or the pharmaceutical sector, and I'll share the report with you, and it was saying that actually sometimes that's the easiest source of funding, and it's often one which is proactively offered to CSOs. But then there is a conflict of interest, and this can become apparent within relationships. There's also more detail in the report, but one of the points it makes is that organizations see that as an acceptable risk. And so for them, it's about mitigating that risk. So mitigating the influence that a donor, be that a pharmaceutical company, would have on their operations or what they're doing in terms of their advocacy messages or these types of things. So it was in summary, there's not enough funding. Funding's really hard to come by. Sometimes the most apparent sources of funding are from the private sector, and that includes the pharmaceutical sector, often proactively making offers to organizations. And it does come with a conflict of interest, and organizations were saying that they are happy to mitigate that, but they were often saying they were not so clear on how to mitigate it. So that was the OSF report, and as I say, I'm very happy to share it to anybody in the room, and I can email it to you. I'll take your names down. So then we set up this sort of internal project within the Action Network to look at what is the relationship between the network and the pharma sector, what should be our relationship as a network, and then hopefully developing some sort of tool that then others can use if they want to, and maybe tailor that and adopt that. So I mentioned the OSF study, and that this is an issue to members, and I was just saying before, when we were just waiting to get going, that there's a number of members that do mention this to us and talk to us about this. There are members that would criticize us for, or at least raise concern about pharmaceutical sectors being within the network, and there's others that say that this is a very good source of funding and we should be looking at it as a source of funding for the network. So there's a real range of views within the network. So, building off the back of the OSF project, which was curtailed due to just restructuring it at the foundation, we felt this is a really important issue that we can then run with. So we are planning to build on that research report, take it wider than just sub-Saharan Africa, so do a wider consultation using members of the network, and hopefully come to producing something that can be useful. Now, at the moment, my feeling is that that might be something like a set of principles, saying that as a CSO or as a network, we are very happy to engage with you, be that any organization really, but let's say a pharmaceutical sector company, if you adhere to these principles. And these principles are very clear, and if an organization is unable to adhere to those principles, then that gives us a legitimate reason not to have engagement. But hopefully what that would do is actually drive change so that organizations live up to those principles. And so we can see behavioral change or structural systematic change within a sector, so that makes engagement with the private sector and the pharma sector easier for us, and one that doesn't contain a conflict of interest, or at least one where we have good mitigation to those risks. So, where are we and what's the plan? So the first phase we're sort of getting towards the end of. So we established an advisory group for this. I think all of that advisory group are members of the network. We approached the members of the OSF steering group as well to come and join us, to have that continuity between the two projects. We really see this as a continuation of that work. And we've started to design, well, we have designed what we feel is the appropriate next steps. And what I'd like to do is that for those that are here now and interested, I will send you the concept note for the rest of the work, along with the OSF report, and I'll put both of these onto Circle as well, so the whole network can see those. The next phase would be to do this consultation, and this is where we want to be speaking to as many of the Action Network members as possible. The methodology for that at the moment would be to have a survey that we would put out to all of the membership to get feedback, and then we would, for those that would want to be involved in a more in-depth way in the consultation, would be to do key informant interviews with members. Where we can, we'll try to get a good balance of geographies, organizational types, organizational size. Those are the types of criteria we'd like to make sure we get a good representation of. And then thirdly, I mentioned that, at the moment, we see that as likely to be a set of principles, a set of integrity principles. It could be something else because the consultation could tell us, actually, that's what's not needed. What we need is X, Y, Z that we haven't thought of yet, or ideas that we've thought of and we think, oh, maybe that's not the right way. We could easily be corrected on that. And then to launch those and disseminate them throughout the network. Our hope is that then that output would be adopted by the network as like in a governance piece for us in terms of membership of the network primarily and engagement with the network, but that other members would be very welcome to take that. So we'll make that as a public good, and you can and other members can take that, tailor it how they want, speak to us and those working on it about tailoring it to their specific needs. And I should mention that that I've been leading this from the Secretariat's point of view in terms of the project management. We have the guidance group, which I've mentioned, which is made up of a number of experts and transitioning over from the OSF project. But then we've hired a consultant to work on this. So the consultant is a lawyer based in the US. He was one of the two authors of the OSF report and has a background in integrity principles between civil society and private sector organizations. I'd previously worked with him at Transparency International, the anti-corruption organization. We developed anti-corruption principles for the Latin American pharmaceutical industry, and he's done other similar projects, but with different sectors. So very well versed in this, and is able to bring a huge amount of expertise. So that's the sort of project outline and what we have done and what we're planning to do. And then ways you can get involved. So if you would like to join the guidance group, which would involve sort of reviewing drafts of the principles, guiding myself and the consultant on where we should be going for things like surveys and who we should be speaking to, you'd be very welcome to do that. And again, please just come and approach me and I can talk to you more about that. We'd love you to participate in the consultation, either through the survey, which we'll send to all of the membership, but if you'd be interested in giving more of your thoughts and expertise, then we would love for you to be one of our key informant interviewees. Generally providing feedback on drafts of deliverables. If you don't want to be a member of the steering group, but you still want to feed in some comments, we're really happy for that to happen. We want as much input from the membership as possible. And then I'll be very grateful for you to support when we launch the principles or whatever output that is, to make sure that it's seen far and wide. Nearly enough from me. Oh, we've lost a slide at the end. Okay. Let's not worry too much about that. So I had a slide with some questions on to put to the room. Doesn't matter, they're very general questions, and you could probably predict what those are. We're only a small group, and so I think we can just share the mic and just use this as a sort of a big roundtable discussion. What I would be really interested in, what we would find incredibly useful, is to hear from you, firstly, whether you have any feedback on the project as a whole, so the concept, what we're planning to do and how we're planning to do it. And then secondly, if you have any thoughts initially on engagement of civil society with, well, mental health civil society with the private sector, but really with the pharmaceutical sector, because that's what this is specifically aimed at, and that's the question we all concern that was often raised to us. So I'll open up to the floor. I don't know if anybody wants to kick us off with thoughts on either the project or just in general the relationship between pharma and mental health CSOs. Yeah, so, oh yeah, thanks, Ali. So the time frame for this is that I would like for us to have something to report back to the membership as a whole, so like a first draft to the membership by the end of the summer, so the Northern Hemisphere summer, so let's say, end of October, November, that sort of time. I don't want to rush this because actually I think this is a really sensitive and critical issue, and I think to just push something through and then to get it wrong wouldn't be helpful in the long term for the organization. So ideally, I would like to have something else, something for the membership to look at and to comment on in general by sort of October time, and for us to have this wrapped up and to come to an agreed output by the end of the year. I think it's realistic for us to, by the end of the calendar year, to have this process completed. But as I say, we're not up against the deadline. So if we need longer, I'd rather we took longer and got it right. But at the same time, it is a pressing issue. It isn't something we'd want to go on for years.
It's just to develop this framework on how to be engaged in private sector and pharma industry, or is there any other initiative that are currently being looked at? For example, I don't know, perhaps addressing a fund or something like that?
Thank you. I appreciate it might be a huge body of work, but I just wondered within the scope of your work, you'd thought about a review of what the current situation is, as much as we could understand, in terms of pharmaceutical companies within the mental health space, what they're doing, who they're funding, what kind of advocacy is taking place, and that kind of, it might help frame, and whether that is something that you'd built into the scope.
Okay, so just on that first point, Better, thank you. This is the priority for us and for me is to produce something for the network. So we have a position where we can say how we engage with the pharmaceutical sector. At the moment, we have an open door policy. So anybody can come and join a network as long as you adhere to the codes of conduct, which are about you as an individual, really. But this is a subject which comes up periodically, and so it's something that we want to be able to say, we've gone through a consultation process with the membership, and we've got to this position. Now, whether that, as I say, that's a set of principles which says, if you adhere to these principles, then we're happy for you to be a member of the network, or if it's another type of product, we don't know yet. But it's primarily something for the network. But we would also like to put that out there as if this would be useful for your organization as well, please take it, please use it, please modify it for your situation. I think that's a really great point. So at the moment, there is, in that OSF report, there is a discussion about what's the current level of engagement of pharmaceutical sectors and mental health civil society in sub-Saharan Africa. But we could widen that out. I don't know if we have the resources and capacity to do a exhaustive review across the world of what the interactions are, but I do feel that we can build on what's there already, and that we can look at case studies, examples, to get a sense of what the interaction is. But I don't think we'd get to that level. We can say this is the number of MOUs that are signed. This is that would probably be out of the scope of this, but it's a really great point, and actually knowing where we stand is really important, because there is a danger here that we sort of make a mountain out of a molehill, or that we're missing. It's actually a really big issue in this area, and we're not. So it's a really great point, and it's something that I can feed back to the consultant. We'll just go here.
Yeah. Thank you. What I think could be wonderful, talking as a CSO organization, is having a kind of a due diligence guidelines that we could approach. For example, we are searching fund or receive an offer, and we do diligence, ethics, and all the context of the donor. But I think especially for this conflict of interest should be right. We don't have expertise to go do a due diligence that is meaningful for, okay, I'm not receiving one hand and giving to the other, and this is a conflict. So I think give us more literacy on this, and by ourselves that we can go beyond this. I think that's it's very helpful for.
Mine was just a practical question. Are you including foundations, pharmaceutical foundations, as well as the pharmaceutical organizations themselves?
So yes, so a foundation, say of the same name of the company or with very obvious and strong links, we would. There are some blind spots in this, and this definitely isn't perfect. So things like, well, not really so apparent to the mental health sector, but medical device companies, for example, like we're not looking at it, it's very much about pharma, other types of private actors within health systems, such as insurance companies. That's not included with this at the moment. It is very much just on pharma, but it's a very good point about foundations and where they are of the same name or with close ties, that would be included within that. I would say that maybe that we put when we get to the end of this and get something we agreed upon within this sort of what could be seen as a narrow scope, is that we'll want to constantly review it. And if it comes back that after 12, 24 months, we think, well, actually there's other actors that we feel could be incorporated within this, then we could revisit it. So it's definitely like all of the governance policies and structures within the Action Network, they're open for periodic review, but I think something new like this, we'd want to be reviewing quite frequently to begin with.
Thank you, James. Very, very important initiative. On the foundation front, at least some international organizations like WHO does include foundation which have 50% or more funding coming from pharmaceutical companies, either one or more, as companies. So they are included in that. My suggestion is that there could be some learnings from other sectors, and one particular sector is the alcohol companies, alcohol producers, and there has been a lot of discussion and dialogue and guidelines on how they fund some of the CSOs and what the CSO's responsibilities and due diligence is in that area. So maybe a quick review of that literature might have some learnings in this area. Thank you.
That's a great point, thank you. And I'd probably include the tobacco industry as well, where there's quite a lot of literature in that when it comes to their engagement with health sector as a whole. So maybe we could draw from that, because that's a really well-established area, but alcohol is obviously more apparent for mental health.
And recently, gambling also, actually.
Gambling as well is a great point, yeah.
I think that to mention, James, that you are working with a lawyer in the US. They used to have this experience with interacting with the private sector. I used to work more than 20 years for the pharma industry, so I used to be on the other side. So and then I decided to leave the drug dealing and to come to health promotion. And yeah, but there are a few also some institutions, for example, you mentioned Latin America. In Brazil, there's an institution called Pharma that regulates the relationship of big pharma within their relationship within the society. I'm pretty sure that in other countries we might have examples. I know that's in Europe and the US as well. And they usually have a few frameworks that we could be using to have this model. Perhaps I can help you with that.
That's really helpful. I've got this one. That's really helpful. And I know of Interpharma just from that work in a previous job. But it's a great example, and we should look into them as well.
And just a personal opinion, I totally understand the worries we need to have around pharma. But sometimes we can find a common objective for us to work with and get the funding we need. I mean, it's quite difficult to interact with private investors from other sectors that sees the benefits of the CSOs projects and stuff like that. But just my passion.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I think just maybe useful context is that a bit of background to this is that I don't know, maybe I started at United, and so with the Action Network, maybe just over 4 years ago, and quite early on this problem was raised, and the suggestion at the time was that we just need to get some legal advice on creating a sort of boilerplate statement that CSOs can just send as an automatic email back to pharmaceutical companies if they make unsolicited offers to companies, just saying, no, thank you, and this is the language. So we've softened from that you know, that was a that was a suggestion from outside the organisation a long time ago, and we've moved a long way from that to potentially having a set of principles, which is about if you can live up to these principles, then we're really happy to engage with you, finding that common ground and hopefully driving behavioural change. So I think for those in the room who are thinking, why is this such a big issue? We should be engaging with Pharma. They're a very important part of the mental health system, and they've got money to provide us. This is certainly not a project saying, how can we shut the door on Pharma and just get rid of that problem? This is saying, how can we create something that could create behavioural change, and then we're in a compromised and comfortable position where we're happy to engage. So it's a point well made, and it's one that we've come along a journey to where we're thinking more about where's the compromised position.
Price to be more accessible and impact more people. I mean, my personal experience, the last company that I used to work with, we were on ADHD medication. We were on ADHD medication, and when we saw the patient pool that currently being treated in Brazil, it was like 100,000 patients in a patient pool of 10 million. So. That's a huge gap for us to be working with, and it's not just about the medication. So a whole other areas that we need to be focusing in order to provide more access to the patient.
Yeah, sorry. What I would like to share is that recently in Brazil, there is a group that are getting together that included farms, but universities, Ministry of Health and Education. They are all in an issue that is diabetics, obesity, that's it? Yeah, obesity and cardio. And I was invited for this forum, and I went, but I would like to see how to touch this, because they are starting a mental health and a youth working group. And I would love to have those guidelines to see, should we be engaged on this to advocate, because they are there advocating in trying to bring, change the nutrition from the schools. They are trying, they are developing policies that are for health. So I don't know, it's something that we could be a case study if you want. There is plenty of experience there to share.
So we need to wrap up. I've just been given the time, so we need to wrap up in 2 minutes. So we've just got time to hear from Priti. I saw you had your hand up. And then I'll start to just send around the sign-up sheet. So if you would like a copy of the OSF report and the concept note for the project, if you can just put your name and email address down here, and I'll send them out.
Yeah, so I think it's not just about receiving funds from the pharma companies, but you'll also need to look at what would they expect in return. Because actually that's where the issue comes in articulation, and like not all CSOs may have the knowledge or even the negotiating power to say no. And so while you are saying you are making it for GMHAN, and you also hope it can be used by CSOs, I think you'll need to ensure that you're covering the element for CSOs. It may not be relevant for GMHAN because you might have the knowledge of who is a pharma company. You might have the knowledge whether they're operating in your market or any other market. And you may have the negotiation power to say no, but you'll need to incorporate that. So I think your objective needs to be inclusive, that the members can use it as a starting point. And I mean, otherwise it won't, I mean, this document will not be meaningful for them, or would be disservice to them if you're putting in so much efforts that they don't get guidance out of it. So it needs to be one of the core objectives.
Thank you, Priti. I think that's a great note to end on. If anybody has any more questions or comments about this as a whole, come and find me. I'm here for the next next 2 days, and you'll see me around here in the hotels and things. So do come and grab me. I'll be very happy to speak to you more about it, and I really welcome your feedback, because as I say, this is very much a membership-wide activity, and we're trying to get as much feedback on your views as possible. The sign-out sheet's going around. I'll send out the 2 documents, and I'll put a little note in there, but if you're interested in any of the other activities or ways you can get involved, reply to that to me, and then I can start to group people together. So, but thank you very much. Thanks for spending your lunch with me. It was great.